It's widely understood that software training and user adoption are critical factors to any sort of digital transformation. However, most organizations don't do these functions very well. But why is that? And what is it you can do to ensure that you handle software training and user adoption well? That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And when we are helping clients with their organizational change strategies and plans, software training and user adoption is one of the critical components of that change management strategy and plan. In fact, it's one of the more commonly understood aspects of change management and one of the areas that organizations recognize a need to focus on. However, most organizations aren't very good at doing software training and ensuring user adoption very well. So what I'd like to do today is talk about what exactly software training and user adoption is, as well as some of the best practices you can use to ensure that you handle this work stream well within your digital transformation. The first thing that's necessary to be successful when it comes to user adoption is to ensure that you're thinking beyond just simple software training. You really have to think outside the box of what is it we need to do beyond training to ensure that our people and our employees fully understand and embrace their new processes, their new roles, their new responsibilities, the new technologies they're using, and just overall changes to their organizational roles and responsibilities. So that's the first thing, is to recognize that training and user adoption goes well beyond classroom-based training or sort of your traditional way of training people to use new technologies. So it helps to back up for a second and understand how people learn in general. And when we think about classroom-based training, sort of that traditional way of training people to use new technologies, usually you'll do that training in a classroom format or maybe online via Zoom a few weeks before going live with new technology. There's nothing wrong with this, and you do need to do that as part of your overall change strategy. But if you wait until that point in the project, right before go live, then you've waited too long to ensure that you are successful with the overall user adoption. So that's the first step, is to think outside the box of traditional classroom-based training and think about what are all the different components and what's the comprehensive plan we need to have in place to ensure that we enable user adoption throughout the entire transformation, so that by the time we get to end user training, it's more of a formality or a capstone based on other activities that we've already done to ensure user adoption. And the remaining points that I'll cover in this video are intended to give you some advice and strategies that we've seen work with other clients to help ensure that you've addressed user adoption that might end up happening shortly before go live. Now, just as we need to think outside the box beyond traditional classroom-based training, we also have to think outside the box of what exactly we're training people to do. More often than not, organizations hire a software vendor and they hire a technical implementer to implement technology. Those software vendors end up creating training materials that are intended to show people how to use technology. That's an important component of training and user adoption, but it's not a complete component of training and user adoption. Instead of learning how to use technology, we need to teach people how to do their jobs in the new post-technology environment. So this entails an understanding of end-to-end business processes, everything that happens in an end-to-end process within your organization. That certainly includes technology, but it also might include touch points with other technologies that you already have in place. So the new technology might be the focus of training in many cases, but you also need to build in an understanding of what other systems end users are going to touch, or what sort of manual processes or decisions need to be made within that overall context of the end-to-end business process. So it's really important to back up and look outside of the myopic view of technology training and focus more on end-to-end business process training as your focus for user adoption. In addition to training employees on what their end-to-end processes are and the technology or technologies they're going to use within those end-to-end processes, it's also important that employees understand how their jobs are going to change. So in other words, as we're training people on how to do their new processes, use the new technologies, we have to do so in the context of comparing it to what they're doing today. So if you think about the average employee, they already understand pretty well what they're doing today. They understand all the nuances, they understand the terminology of the technology they're using, They understand the good, the bad, the ugly of the technology they're using today. And so we need to relate it back to what they're doing today so they understand how they need to change going forward. And that may sound simple enough, but it's an important nuance that oftentimes gets overlooked in training and user adoption strategies. Too often we focus exclusively on training people on what the new process is or what the new technology is, but as an employee, I need to understand how those new processes tie back to what I'm doing today so that I can change my behavior, change my processes, change my role, change my use of technology, and all that good stuff. So when we're thinking about user adoption strategies that are most effective, it's important to ensure that we're training people in the context of connecting the dots between the way they do business today and the way they do their jobs today versus the way they are going to need to do their jobs in the future. Now, thus far, I've talked about end-to-end business processes and change impacts and how we need to think outside the box of training strategies. That's all important stuff, but we do also need to focus on technology. So I don't want to dismiss that point that we do need people to understand how to use new technology, how that user interface works, how the transactions work, how they find different menu paths within the system, whatever the case may be. But the key here, again, just to reiterate, is that we don't want to wait until end user training to train people how to use the new system. If we wait until end user training shortly before go live, then we've waited too long because it's impossible to impose that sort of change and train people on new processes in such a short period of time. These changes that are typically pretty significant for most people within organizations that go through digital transformation are significant enough that they need time for it to marinate and sink in within their minds and their behavior. So we have to think outside the box again of what do we do before we get to end user training to start to build that case and build that foundation for change behavior and new behaviors that we want from employees. So here's where we think about other opportunities to start communicating changes, starting to communicate process changes, as well as how to use the new technology within the future state environment. So for example, one tactic that's highly effective in starting to build and change people's behavior is through user acceptance testing. So user acceptance testing is a process that's typically used to ensure that the software works and fits the business needs from a business perspective, but it can also be highly effective in ensuring that people understand and start to learn how that new technology works. So it's a sort of precursor to the end user go live training that happens shortly before go live. It's a great way to build a foundation and start to get people comfortable with the technology well before you get into the formalized training. Another tactic that's highly effective early in a project all the way through and after go live is to build digital adoption tools. So things that people can do at their own pace, either in terms of a formalized learning structure and or through tutorials. So as people are on certain screens or completing certain workflows or transactions within a system, if they have online, immediate, on-demand access to a tutorial that shows them how to perform that particular task or function, that can be a highly effective way to ensure that you start to get people comfortable with the change, not only before go live and leading up to go live, but even after go live to provide that as a support tool and mechanism going forward. Now, some software vendors have their own digital adoption tools, but most of those software vendors' tools are focused on how to just use their software. So the key here is to find a digital adoption tool that's technology agnostic, that looks beyond just one technology, to help build training materials and collateral to help people understand their processes, their roles, as well as potentially multiple technologies they might be using to perform their jobs. For example, we at Third Stage have a proprietary digital adoption tool that's technology agnostic and can be used in any web-based or browser-based software platform. So whether it's your new system or your old legacy systems or some sort of combination of both, this digital adoption tool can be used to provide tutorials and on-demand training and guides that people can use on their computers to figure out how to perform their business processes and transactions within your system. So whether you use this digital adoption tool or any other, it's important to recognize that there are multiple ways to ensure that people learn technology, and you want to be doing so in a way that brings that process or that activity forward as early in the project as possible. Now, the final step in ensuring you have a successful user adoption strategy is to ensure that you don't view end user training as a one and done sort of event. So in other words, training should not be this culmination of activities that lead to pre-go live training that then leads into go live. That's an important milestone. It's one of a sequence of events, but it shouldn't stop there. You should have ongoing refresher training. You should have ongoing support materials, ongoing online access, and social media tools internally that can be used to help ensure that end users and employees have the resources they need to perform their jobs, and that they have access to resources that can help them do their jobs. So it's important to think about your user adoption and training strategy as an end-to-end process that begins as early as possible in your transformation journey and continues well beyond go live, so that you have ongoing collateral materials to help people do their jobs better. So these are some of the strategies and tactics we've seen work best when it comes to software training and user adoption. And software training and user adoption is one of many pieces of an effective change management strategy. For more information about how to manage change within your organization, including user adoption, I encourage you to download our guide to change management, which is a best practices guide and some tips and lessons within that guide to help you understand and learn some of the best practices we've seen work best within change management strategies within digital transformations throughout the world. So I encourage you to download that guide to learn more about change management. I also encourage you to download some of the other resources I've included links to below. You can find these links below in the description field. These materials are meant to help you through your digital transformation journey. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day. It's no secret, or my kids always say, "Are you serious right now?" To ensure that you get the user adoption and training needs that you have to be business processes and transactions with it. Wow.